Hello, everybody. My name is Mick Muller. I'm the president of Montague WebWorks, a local web company, and the president of the Greenfield Business Association. And welcome to the Downtown Greenfield Parking Forum. Today is February 10th. It's about 5:33, and this is going to last about an hour, a little bit longer. We have a number of questions that came in ahead, and Jeff Sauser, who is on my screen right below me, right down there, doing the Brady Bunch thing. Just want to introduce you a little bit about the Greenfield Business Association. We're a membership organization here in Greenfield, of course. We rebooted the organization in 2020. It's been around for a little over 50 years. The board's had a lot of turnover during that time, obviously. Our objectives are to increase advocacy for businesses in all Greenfield, not just downtown. Enhance business-to-business partnerships, additional marketing for the Greenfield area, applying for grants to redistribute it out, and we're continuing to try to revitalize the downtown with stuff like the decorations and all that. So we hope you're all noticing that, and if you're not a member, that you'd be enticed to become a member. This forum is one of a series that we're doing. Last month, we did one with Representative Whips. She is the new representative for the northern section of Greenfield and the whole new redistricting thing. And we'll be doing another one with Natalie Blaze coming up, I think, next month. So I'm just going to go in, skip over the rest of my little script here because we don't have that much time, and introduce. We're fortunate to welcome urban planner Jeff Sauser, who also happens to be a Greenfield resident and downtown business owner and member of the Greenfield Parking and Traffic Commission. So Jeff can wave there. He'll be representing his personal perspective, and he's not acting on behalf of the commission in this moderator role. He will be moderating and espousing various things on the topic tonight. Some quick Zoom etiquette. We will start with everyone muted. On my screen, Rachel, who's right over there, will be muting and unmuting people. And you can unmute yourself when it's your turn to talk. We hope this can continue as an informal dialogue about the downtown parking situation. There's a lot of feelings surrounding how parking should be. So let's keep the flow of conversation well and keep our tempers down or whatever. Feel free to use the chat. If you mouse over your screen, you'll see there's a chat button. You can type stuff in there, and Rachel will be monitoring that and will act appropriately. With that, let's get started. Hey, Jeff.
Hey, Mick, thank you very much. Hello, everybody. So I'm Jeff Sauser. I'm a Greenfield resident, co-owner of Green Space Co-work, which is a business downtown that doesn't have any parking. So parking is something that we confront too with our customers. And by day, I'm an urban planning consultant with a consulting company called Stantec. My team's based in Boston, and I do all sorts of urban planning things for public and private clients. But a lot of that does center around the public realm, which is our word for streets and parks and places. And parking is often what it all boils down to. Parking is how people come and go. It's the critical part of a development program. It's a critical part of a master plan for a downtown or a neighborhood. And I think it's a great topic to address today and on an ongoing basis as the city reboots its downtown revitalization plan. And there's a lot of change happening to the downtown parking inventory. It's always something to come back to. I'm excited to talk about this with you guys, especially to get the business owner perspective. I know there's a number of people here, but many of us here are business owners specifically, although we might also wear other hats in the community too. And so I thought to start, I might just share some thoughts from my perspective on just parking, kind of set the stage, provide some context about how I think about parking and the many ways to think about it. And then we would have a discussion if we can. There's not an excessive number of people here, so they might be able to pull that off. I got a couple of topics we could talk about. Maybe we break the remaining time into a couple of stages of discussion to hit those topics, and I'll introduce them and then let you guys take it from there. And I believe the idea is people could just unmute and start talking if that works. If that's not too chaotic, if there's too many voices, we can, Rachel can help me maybe go one at a time, raising hands or typing in the chat. So parking in general is, as we all know, many things to many people. It means we only have one main street, one set of on-street parking spaces, a fixed number of parking lots and garage spaces, but they're used for many different people for many different reasons. And I think it's helpful to start the conversation just recognizing that range of perspectives, and then we can talk about how it might pertain to business interests or your own perspective. So who does our downtown parking supply serve? It serves our customers, it serves the community's visitors, it serves employees, it serves residents. There's also delivery drivers that use the parking downtown. And each of these people has a different approach to what spot they want, how they want to use that spot, when do they need it. And then sometimes parking spaces become other things like outdoor dining, or maybe we close a couple spots on the weekend to put an ice sculpture out. So they can take all kinds of personalities and functions in our community. And so one way to think about how to program that parking space and organize it, manage it, is to consider what types of experiences people have when they're parking, and how can we make that a better experience to make downtown a more vital, walkable place, to make our businesses more successful, to make it easier for our customers to come and go. So maybe some examples, some people might come into town, they want to park right at the front door to a business, run in, grab something, run back out, and drive away. That's what they're here for. Someone else might want to just kind of park their car somewhere, they don't care where, for a while, and walk from store to store and browse and just explore. Someone else might come into town every single day and they want to park in the same cheap parking lot for 8 hours, go to work, and in the evening they go home. And I'm sure there's dozens of other scenarios we could think about. And in reality, the parking supply downtown needs to serve all of those needs, and ideally it does it well across that range of perspectives. So some of the principles or strategies that we want to consider when we try to make the parking supply, or singular parking supply, serve a multiplicity of needs and experiences all at the same time. Parking needs to be flexible. There needs to be a variety of parking options that are reflective of the diverse needs of people as they operate downtown. Spaces need to be shared to some degree, so that the same space can serve someone in the morning, maybe it needs to serve someone else at night. And so the way that those spaces are utilized needs to reflect how demand patterns change over the course of a day, a week, or a year. Parking needs to be intuitive. The rules need to be easy to understand. They need to seem fair. You don't want to feel like you're getting gouged. And parking management shouldn't feel antagonistic. It shouldn't feel like they're out to get you. It should feel orderly and fair. And there needs to be clear signage, wayfinding, which means, can you find what you're looking for? It needs to be obvious to people who either know where they're going or don't. You don't want confusion, you don't want frustration, and there needs to be the perception that there's an adequate supply at all times, if you can, for the uses that are, that crop up over the course of the day and the week. So that makes it very complicated. I think when we think about how we use parking personally, it's pretty straightforward because we're just doing one thing at a time. But downtown's doing a lot of things all at the same time. So I think that's a helpful context just to appreciate how complicated it can get. And then we try to work through serving all the different needs as best we can. So it's, the limited parking supply can work for a larger and complex community. So I think the discussion topics I thought of for tonight are, the first one's maybe more nuts and bolts, focused on parking inventory, as I'm calling it. And maybe we can ask folks from your perspective, what's working, what's not working, what's needed, any other creative ideas you might have. I think this is a forum. We're having a conversation. We're not setting new policy. We're not making official decisions. This is just to get ideas out there so we can all work together as a community towards better solutions. So, and the second question would be taking a broader perspective of how parking fits into other things. We talk a bit about complete streets and the relationship between parking and other modes of mobility, like walking, biking, outdoor dining, those sorts of things. We'll get to that one second. I wanted to start with the inventory question, just nuts and bolts. How does parking work for you? And so I have a few ways to think about that. Again, this is just to give you some food for thought, get your gears turning, not telling you what to say. The components of parking inventory are the types of spaces, for example. So there's short-term spaces, 30 minutes or less, just to in and out shopping. Medium term, a couple hours maybe. Long-term is 8+ hours. There's loading spaces, handicap spaces, motorcycle spaces. So maybe you could tell us how which of those are most important to you? How you or your constituency or your customers use those? What are they looking for? So there's types, there's location. So do you need prime spots right on Main Street? Or some people are okay parking on-street parking in surrounding streets. How do the parking lots and garages function relative to you and downtown? Pricing, another important component. There's free parking, there's cheap parking that's just a quarter or 50 cents, higher cost, you're paying a few bucks. And then there's permits, monthly, annual permits. So different people need different pricing scenarios at different times. And then the last one would be management and enforcement. So signage, you feel like signage is working well, any ideas about that? Payment, we have lots of different options here. We have meters you can feed with quarters. There's kiosks, you go get a little ticket, pay by the app. Thoughts on that? We've all gotten parking tickets probably, or I have at least, even if I didn't mean to, tried to avoid it. And the permit system in general, we have that gets updated every once in a while. Is that something that you or your employees or your customers utilize, and any commentary there? So types of spaces, locations, pricing, management, enforcement. What do you guys think?
I'll start if you'd like. My name is Kristen and I own Aliber's Bridal on Federal Street. So part of our issue is that we don't have on-street parking right outside our doors. There are 5 businesses on this end of Federal Street that don't have parking on street. So we rely on parking that is either around the corner in front of Baker's or in front of the hangar. Or if there is available pay and display spaces in the Ames Street parking lot. We as a business don't we do ask our staff to please park in the downtown lot, which is behind Wilson's, so that we don't take up those pay and display spots. Most of my staff is part-time, so it's not worthwhile for them to actually buy a yearly parking pass. And it is tough for them to pay for parking when technically that means that they're getting paid an hour less, $1 less per hour that they work. But luckily that is something that they can claim in taxes. So, so we rely on, I guess, what you would term the mid-level parking, because most of the customers that do come in our store are in our store for about 2 hours at a time. They're definitely not in and out, especially when it's a bride. We have an hour and a half shopping time, and then at least another half-hour buffer for any of the checkout process or whatever. So we do rely on that on-street parking. Definitely, I feel like if there was the possibility of having vertical parking outside hangar, that would be even better than the parallel parking that is right now. Horizontal, whatever. I feel like it would be better just because it would add more spaces. And it is tough to find spaces. A lot of times our customers come in and say, hey, we parked across the street at the bank. Is that okay? No, it's really not. So we do have to tell them that. But yeah, the lack of spaces in the Ames Street parking lot is a little bit tough for us because there's 12 spaces right now for pay and display. And unfortunately, people just don't pay attention that well to the signage that says that they're parking in a permanent spot. And I don't know how many people end up getting a ticket, excuse me. But that's us. So I guess that's all I need to say right now, right?
That's great, thank you.
So you have Tim had his hand up next. Are you okay with Tim?
Is everybody okay with me?
Yes. I didn't see Jeff was talking to a child, so we all have our multiple hats on, right?
Yeah, so I'm speaking as an owner of Ice Cream Alley right on Main Street, and former city councilor, though no longer. And I want to speak to something I think that's really important related to supply. as part of an unrelated project, I spent about 6 months trying to get parking data from the mayor's office in terms of not just revenue that comes in, but actually how many spaces are occupied at what times of day, what's our maximum occupancy, that sort of thing. And I put in public records requests and talked to the chief of staff multiple times, and eventually concluded that that information doesn't exist. Greenfield does not keep track of that. Even the parking garage, which we're supposed to be able to tell kind of on a minute by minute basis, obviously that system hasn't been working, and we don't even know what the occupancy rate is. So feelings are one thing about parking. I really would like to see our decisions made based on facts in the world and counting the number of cars and the number of empty spaces. I think that that's kind of should be, there is a correct number of parking spaces. That's not too many and not too few. And I think we need to push the city to measure that before we kind of make any decisions about the parking supply. Speaking from an ice cream alley perspective, my biggest problem is Main Street is empty and it looks depressing. You know, on a weekday, having all of those row upon row of empty parking spaces is not an asset to my business, and it's space that could be better used in other ways. So that's my perspective, but I would really like to see the data.
Thank you, Tim. Bill was next, unless Jeff, you want to speak in between.
Well, to try to synthesize Kristen's comment and Tim's, I think what a really effective way to operate at the beginning of not that we're in a formal process right now, but we're talking about this stuff, I think you really do need to get the anecdotal experiential stories people have, but then also ground truth those with data. It's a hard thing to do, keep track of all this stuff. When I'm on the parking commission, we think about that too. It's an important question. I know that's something that we're trying to work on to get that utilization data, both just on a daily basis, but really throughout the course of a day. And I do think that we're making progress figuring that out. But that's something everyone should keep an eye on too. I think about how the parking supply is meeting your needs, but also observe where there's too many parking spaces, or there really does seem to be a crunch over there. That helps us all work together. And that data often can be surprising too, I think. In some cases, it confirms the experience people have. In other cases, it might help them find opportunities to solve problems in new ways.
Thanks. Bill, you ready? Bill, you're muted.
All right, yeah, here I am. So I guess I have a couple of things. I think right now, in just commenting on the utilization of the parking spaces, I think it has, over the last couple of years, we've been dealing with COVID. So I don't think that's a realistic count, because in the past, parking has been a big issue. And I was looking at the plans in the Wilson window, and I noticed in my block where Rise Above and Bakers, and there is currently 9 spots. And if the renovations or the improvements on Main Street actually happen, that's going to be 5 spots. That's almost a 50% reduction in parking. And if you go by in the morning and you look at the folks coming in and out of just that one shop, Rise Above, those spaces are turning over constantly. People are getting their bread, they're going in, they're going out, another person's coming in. Constantly. I spoke with Brian. I don't know if he's here. I don't think he made it tonight, but he's very opposed to reducing any parking. Going home this evening, I live in Rose, I have a 40-minute commute, and I went by Greenfield's Market. At 4:30, there was 1 open parking space in front of Greenfield's Market. Every single space was full. You reduce that by 50%, that's going to dramatically affect their business. Each parking space, to me, is it's one of the greatest assets any business can have, is parking. And eliminating any of it, I think, on Main Street is absolutely and it would absolutely hurt businesses tremendously. Everybody I went up, I spoke with, I was hoping we'd have more representation here, but everybody I spoke with was vehemently opposed to reducing any parking. I pulled customers through the store in the last few days. I can't find anyone that says, yeah, let's reduce parking. So I'm feeling like we built the parking garage for a reason, and that's because we didn't have enough parking. And so why we would want to reduce parking on Main Street, I think would very much hurt business. So
Thanks, Bill.
that's what I have to say right now.
All right.
One observation, it is related to Tim's comment too, is I think Main Street, each block has a pretty different parking dynamic. And Bill, your block is, I agree. I mean, my business is right there. Both locations are on either side of that, and it's jammed all the time. Other blocks on Main Street are empty all the time. But I think that's just our downtown is a pretty diverse set of blocks, and as more development comes, you know, the intensity might be a little higher even in some areas where we're not seeing any activity. So I think, you know, being sensitive to those needs is crucial. And I do think it's a combination of a capacity issue, but also management, and maybe there's, you know, for example, people might be sitting in spots for 2 hours at a location where really those shouldn't be 2-hour spots, because you might be able to get 5 customers use that same spot within that 2-hour window. But I think that's a call for more experimentation, but also sensitivity not to break something that's not broken, or at least not to make it worse, you know, as we try to figure out solutions to make it better.
And Isaac was next.
Thanks. I have a lot to say on the subject.
Well,
I am in the same spot Tim is as a former city councilor, but I want to highlight a few things. I think he's right. There are places where there are too much parking. I think those tend to be in the big box plazas, places like Stop and Shop and BJ's, where the parking lots are half empty all the time. While there are times when no businesses are open, that there's a pretty vacant downtown, I think that has to do with the hours of occupation of the various businesses, not related to whether or not people are coming downtown. I think locations like the west end of Main Street, which seem empty all the time, if you go there on Sunday morning when the Holy Trinity Church is in session, you can't find a parking spot. So I think thinking about that mixed use is important. Speaking specifically about the garden block, I have the garden building. We have parallel parking in front of us currently. It has not always been that way. Historically, it was vertical parking. When they put in the traffic calming island in front down the building, they flipped it. We could use a lot more parking in front of our building. We would like to see a return to vertical parking. And I've been told historically that the reason why they can't do that is because there's not enough space because of the island. We would also like to get rid of the island, because the island, while it's traffic calming, attracts loiterers and people who are soliciting. And by eliminating that space, they would solicit in other spaces and loiter in parks, places that are set for people to be sitting. Vertical parking, we think, is in and of itself traffic calming, because it slows people down as it narrows the lanes. The vertical parking acts as a traffic calming mechanism. We have people who stay for my business, which is the theater. They could be there for an hour and a half to 2.5, sometimes 3.5 hours. So they do long-term parking, but my other tenants don't necessarily, they want shorter-term parking. Historically, a lot of the people who came to the theater would park at the library parking, because that parking was not in use during most of the time that the theater is in use. It's a little different in the summertime when we're running all day long. But that parking is temporarily gone. My biggest concern is my two top demographics for the theater are senior citizens, and we have an aging population, and children. And the parking garage, if you park at the parking garage, it is a massive slope up Bank Row for people to get. So my elderly patrons are not going to park in the parking garage. They seldom park anywhere along Bank Row. They did park at the library and would walk across, and they park towards the top of the library where the post office is, but they wouldn't park really towards the bottom. They want to be as close to Main Street as possible so that they're not walking on an incline. It's an accessibility issue. The new design for the library parking, all of the parking is at the bottom of that slope. So anyone who parks there has to walk up. So for accessibility purposes, and I'm not talking about people who have wheelchairs or handicapped accessibility plates. These are people who are just elderly. There is a massive insufficiency of parking right along Main Street. And we know some of this will work out in time, but we would really like to see more vertical parking on our block and to accommodate those particular types of patrons. And we think it could be done. Thank you.
Jeff, did you want to speak to that, or do you want me to move on?
Every other time, so we can get more people to talk.
All right, then I will go to Mick.
Speaking about the new library parking lot, it's, I think, going to provide more parking than what is there now, because we're going from, I don't know, I haven't studied it too much, but I'm just wondering, an answer also to an earlier question from Tim, will that parking situation somehow connect? Will there be a pathway or something to get over to Federal Street? You know, the parking garage, you know, is great and there are some people that don't know that you can get out of the parking garage at the northern end halfway up the hill. You know, you take a staircase up and you can walk out, you know, right next to the typewriter place, which is cool because now you're halfway up the hill, because that's a mean hill. Also, if there could be access out the other way towards the courthouse, so that you can take the stairs up and then walk out east there. So just, is there a way any of the parking that we have or we will get could have multiple accesses out to different parts of the downtown, so they would become a little bit more appealing to the people that are parking, because they might not want to park there if they have to come out, go all the way here, all the way here. Like if we can just get a direct path in. So from a design point of view, I don't know if MJ or anybody else here who has access to those designs, if that is consideration when they're configuring the new parking. Yeah, so I can pause on that.
Thank you, Mick.
I'm not sure about the library myself, that particular connection you were talking about, but making the parking we have feel as close to the places people want to go is definitely important. If someone's walking out to Hope Street to get to the theater, that's a problem. It needs to be, there needs to be some wayfinding, some, you know, maybe there's signage to like think about destinations people are typically going to, and then make sure there's a assigned route to get there, so they're not kind of fending for themselves, especially if they're their first time here. And that's when you can, you know, really capture or lose somebody. If they think I'm never going back to Greenfield because it's a pain to get around, I got lost. And then you want to feel welcoming, not antagonistic or threatening or confusing. On the, Isaac, you were talking about the angled parking, at least that's my term for it, as a traffic calming device. All on-street parking is a traffic calming device. Even if, you know, on my street, I live on a street that has just informal on-street parking. People just kind of park and clog up the way, and that slows people down too. So it's all types of on-street parking, both slow down cars and also protect pedestrians from cars and make the sidewalks more walkable. So that's definitely true. Angle parking pushes those cars a little bit further out, but head-in angle parking, which is what you call, what we have in Greenfield, is considered the most dangerous type of on-street parking. Now we know how to use it, you get used to it. Parallel parking is safer because, so if you think about pulling out of a spot, an angled spot like we have today, you can't see the traffic coming at you till your car is 2/3 of the way out into traffic. So that creates more problems for, you know, accidents, people run into you, and also, you know, bikes too. You're not going to see a cyclist either until you're pulled pretty far out. But on the other hand, people can adapt and get used to it. But if you wanted to have a safer parking configuration that is still angled, some places have back end angled parking, and people don't like that for different reasons because it's tricky. Now we do have backup cameras on our cars more and more that help, but that allows you to get more spaces. But also, if you can imagine, if you backed into your angled spot, as you pull out, you only have to pull out a little bit, and you can see the traffic is coming. So each of those solutions kind of has its pros and cons.
You can use that same backup camera when you're pulling out.
That's true. I don't have a backup camera.
Neither do I.
That is true. That's a good point. And that might, I bet there's some data that's proving that that's making that type of configuration safer. It's definitely more, it feels more natural to pull in straight in.
Right.
Parallel parking is more advantageous, in particular if you don't have very much space from curb to curb to work with and you want to get more stuff in the street, or you want to make the sidewalks wider. And that's not necessarily a problem we have here. Our main street is pretty wide. So just a number of design considerations if you're thinking about options for changes.
There's also an argument to be made about people who cannot parallel park. That would not be me. I'm just saying there are plenty of people who can't parallel park to save their lives.
And if they're bicyclists, just opening up your door and, you know, bicycle rides right into your door. Sorry for the people that have their hands up. I had two questions, and the other one was about safety. And I actually wrote to the Greenfield Police Department and asked them to send me a record of all accidents on Main Street. And I didn't pull together a spreadsheet or anything. It's a massive document, but I went through it and I looked, and there were almost no like backing out, you know, rear-ending an oncoming car accident. Almost all of the reports of accidents and whatever were people getting hit in the crosswalks and people slipping on ice and like other kinds of accidents that just happened to be on Main Street. So there was almost no backing into an oncoming car because traffic does go very slow on Main Street, and people are looking for cars backing out because they don't want to drive into them. So now I'm done.
All right, thanks. I'm gonna, Bill was the next person to have his hand up.
I just want to reiterate that as a business person, I look at it as a parking spot as a revenue generating area. I'm looking at it economically. And any reduction in parking is going to hurt my business economically. I have a lot of my clients are older. They come in and get cards. They want to park close by. I want that parking space turning over. And I look at, and so any reduction in parking is going to definitely hurt my business. And I think it's going to hurt any business that's on Main Street, especially when we're in such flux right now with what's going to happen with Wilson's. How's that going to be redeveloped? How many more parking spaces? What might we need? I am opposed. I'm great for redeveloping the Main Street and so forth, but any reduction in parking is detrimental to the health of helping the current merchants that are there, the retailers and businesses that are there, and it's going to thwart any new people from coming in because that's their lifeline. So
Thanks, Bill. All right, I'm gonna slide over to Isaac, and then it's gonna be Heidi and then Bob.
So a lot of what I was going to say has already been said by other people related to backup cameras and the inability to parallel park. But I think there's something to be said for the culture of a community and the type of parking it has historically had and what people are prepared for and what they've been trained for. And I lean again on the aging population of Greenfield and whether or not change actually makes things more dangerous because people are used to a particular type of parking, of that angled parking. I know that's sort of counter to what I'm asking for at my location, which is to change it to angled parking. But I think through the community as a whole, we're used to that angled parking in the downtown. And I think that unless you have lots of empty spaces, parallel parking can be very difficult, particularly for the two demographics which I'm most interested in, which are the elderly, and brand new drivers, the very youngest drivers, those 16, 17-year-olds who are coming and spending a lot of money at the movies. Those groups, I think, have a harder time with the parallel parking. And I also think that there are other dangers that are created by the economic impact of not having that parking, as buildings go vacant because there's not enough business. Those buildings create some danger too. They're not vehicular danger, but there are other kinds of danger that they create.
Thank you, Isaac. Anything you want to jump in on, Jeff, or do you want to let me just keep on going? All right, I'm gonna head on over to Heidi.
So as a downtown business owner, and I'm right on Main Street, and parking is very important to me. And I think this taking away spaces, it's just, I don't like it. I think I'm very opposed to it. I think the parking is fine the way it is. I don't understand why there needs to be a bike path. Because I don't know, or a bike lane, because I don't know how you're going to go, like, how do you get from the bike lane to a bike path? Where is the closest bike path in Greenfield to get on, to go from point A to point B? Do we have a bike path in Greenfield? Is it just the one that's behind, between the jail and the river? Is that the only bike path there is? Do we need to have a bike, lane on Main Street? I never really see people on bikes on Main Street. I see them on the sidewalks more than anything else. And that's not just for Plum. We have a second business in this same block. And, to cut our parking in half is just, I don't think it's going to do any good for the downtown. And if we can learn from other people's mistakes, if I can remember correctly, Northampton, in 2020, changed all of their parking to parallel parking and spent about $1 million to do it. And it lasted maybe a month, if that, because all of the business owners were very opposed to that configuration of the parallel parking and a bike lane. So, maybe we could think about that and maybe save ourselves the trouble. And also, like, do we, can we use the money for something else to help elevate downtown, maybe to use it for grants to small businesses, to help small businesses maybe have more businesses to update their facades, maybe to plant more trees, maybe to get more police foot traffic in downtown Greenfield. Maybe to update the street lamps so they're a little bit brighter so people don't get hit by cars in crosswalks. Maybe elevate and make the crosswalks beautiful little speed bumps to help slow down the traffic and actually let people understand that there is a crosswalk, because some people don't even slow down when you try to cross the street to go to, Rise Above to get some bread. It's like taking your life in your own hands. So that's what I have to say. Thank you.
Heidi. Yeah.
Jump in there if I can. Heidi, that was great. Lots of good things to talk about. I think for the sake of argument, it would be worth considering some of these things not mutually exclusive. So just for the sake of argument, let's imagine that we don't have to change anything about the parking, and we can add a bike path. The reason people bike on the sidewalk is because they don't feel safe biking on the road. When I bike through downtown with my 7-year-old daughter, we bike on the sidewalk because I don't want her to get hit by, it's the same reason anyone else could imagine. When we bike anywhere else in town, and I bike every day to work when the weather's nice, I bike on just the street because it's safe. It's just a slow street. We don't have that many busy roads in Greenfield. So I think most people who would be biking aren't recreationally using a path, some regional path network. They're going to work, or a lot of our members at our co-working space bike to work during the summer. So they're just coming from the neighborhood, down the neighborhood streets. And then when they get to Main Street, it's busy and chaotic, which is a good thing as long as nobody gets hurt. And they would much rather use those lanes. So there's all sorts of statistics about how there's like a spectrum of cyclists in terms of skill and comfort and risk tolerance. So only the people in the spandex going 40 miles an hour will ride on 5 and 10 and ride right through Main Street and not care about anything, or Bike Messenger in Boston or something, where they can just jump over the door if it opens in front of them. But I think we want a community is most inviting if everybody feels comfortable using the facilities it has. So a bike path that's on the sidewalk side of the parked cars, not on the, you don't want to be between the parked cars and the moving traffic. That's even worse than just being in the traffic and holding your own lane. That makes it so people will, I ride my bike to get ice cream on the weekends with my daughter. I'd love to go down a path on Main Street. And I think more people would do things like that, especially when the weather's nice. So I see a good bike connectivity and safe facilities downtown as a way to strengthen local businesses, because people will bike to them and make it part of their day. It's an outing for us on a nice day, for those, especially for those businesses that are conducive to biking. That maybe not a bridal shop, people might not bike home in their wedding dress, but for some of the businesses, I think there's solutions that can suit whole cohorts of the population that serve a number of us. I forgot some of the other thoughts. Oh, the other thing I guess I wanted to mention is, Heidi, you mentioned, why can't we spend the money on something else, which does make sense. All the things you listed, facades, public safety, lighting, those are all worth spending money on too. In the way that the funding works, there's buckets of money for each of those things. And so I think we want to tackle all of those. The money for Main Street is not discretionary funding we could send somewhere else. That's a state grant that is for exactly this type of project. So
I understand that.
okay. But it's not.
So why do we need to do it now? Why can't we get some more grants or some more money to help entrepreneurs open business in downtown Greenfield? Then more people will come to Greenfield and more people will bike into town. I mean,
I think my personal opinion is you need to try to tackle all those things as best you can. And inviting downtown feels like a safe place to walk. It's parking makes sense and is usable and convenient. There's enough of it. You can bike. And there's great new businesses you want to check out, and it looks nice too. It's well lit, it's safe. I mean, all these things kind of reinforce each other. So I think we need to address them all.
Thanks, Jeff. Bob, you're up. Do you you got yourself unmuted already? Okay, Bob.
Hi. For 30 years, I was the director of the YMCA on Main Street, and parking was a big deal. I just want to emphasize something Tim said. I think Isaac said it. You cannot remember or focus on how parking is now. COVID, the Y is running about 40–50% of the usage that it did when I retired. The courthouse, Isaac could tell you, I don't know what percentage of occupancy they're running. It's way down. And parking, we had to have a parking guard at the Y 20 hours a week back in 2019 when I retired because of the parking demand. And I couldn't imagine now with the library project going on and the fire station across from Hope and Olive, I couldn't imagine what that end of town would be like if there wasn't COVID. It would be a disaster as far as parking goes. So luckily COVID's here for now, but it's not going to be here forever. So you need to think about what it used to be and then add on to it what it can be. If Wilson's could have, say, my dream is 50 market rate apartments in there, so people live downtown and can spend money downtown, they're going to need parking and so forth. Anyway, just a comment about don't think about parking the way it's been the last 2 years. Think about what it used to be. And maybe MJ, maybe there's numbers from 2019, 18, 17. Because someday we'll be back there.
Thank you, Bob. Tim is next.
Yeah, I just want to hopefully complicate this just a little bit. I think there's an assumption underlying a lot of the conversation and a lot of conversations about parking that every single task that anyone does in town involves a car trip and parking. And I would like to say, obviously my business is different than some people's business. We're only open in the summer and we generally serve a very small local community, but we have people arriving all kinds of different ways. We have people arriving on bikes. We have people with kids walking down from the hill. We have people coming on exotic forms of micromobility, and we have people coming in cars. And certainly not every business is like that, but I would say the library is definitely like that, and farmers market is definitely like that, and Greenfield's market is definitely like that, and Town Hall is. And there are a lot of places that actually do cater to people coming and going in a lot of different ways. I think a focusing on parking only is a way of disenfranchising the people in our community who don't have cars and for whom that infrastructure does not serve. I also wanted to say there's a danger in conversations like this about talking about parking supply in a vacuum, as if the only question is expanding or contracting that supply. Obviously, there are trade-offs here. So I am actually generally in favor of reducing parking on Main Street. And I am not in favor of that if it means widening the road so that people go faster. That is not a goal of mine. But if it's creating a segregated bike lane, which would allow more people who are, doing recreation or commuting on bikes like I do to come to my shop, that's a huge positive. If it narrows the roadway and controls some of that traffic noise and traffic speed, that's one of the main things that makes my business less pleasant. That's an asset. So there's a trade-off involved, and there's also the question: if we take away parking supply, or if we don't create new parking supply, what are we going to do with that space on Main Street, which is so valuable instead? So those are my thoughts.
Thank you, Tim. Jeff, do you want to comment on that?
Yeah, I think, well, recognizing that there's a very different customer base for different businesses in town. So, a restaurant or an ice cream shop is maybe mostly local people who maybe could walk. Other businesses like Kristen's, I imagine your customers are more regional. This might be the only time they ever come to Greenfield in many cases. And they're not going to bike 50 miles from wherever they come from. So the parking supply needs to, you don't want to have, I think the worst thing you can do is have too many spaces, because that's just a waste of land, a waste of space. And it's very, it makes people feel like there's nothing going on here. There's just a ton of empty spaces. But on the other hand, you don't want to have too few. And at the end of the day, a good parking management strategy is kind of right sizes the parking, but also sensitive to the different needs of different users and owners and tenants along Main Street. So I think it is possible for everyone to get, access to parking in the ways that they need. And it doesn't have to be a zero-sum game, but it's a balance, because this is it's a public street, it's a finite supply and a multiplicity of demands on it.
Thank you, Jeff. Mick is next, and then Isaac, and then Russ.
About the couple of things about the biking. I mean, it's all what are you going to put on Main Street, on the actual street, so it's not only the possibility of reducing the number of parking by going from angle to parallel, which you can just see, it takes up more space, reducing the amount of parking, which also reduces the income to the town, to the city itself, right? Because the city makes money on the parking. So it's not just the reduction because of the changing of the angle, but also we have more and more of this on-street eating, like you have in front of Wild Roots, in front of Ice Cream Alley, in front of Brad's. I'm surprised that Main Street Bar and Grill didn't push out into parking spots. They probably were like, no, we don't want to take up 3 parking spots so that 4 people can eat. But that's the sign of a really nice downtown, is all that outdoor dining, people being outside, and there being less cars right next to where you're trying to have your fine meal, having big diesel trucks moving in and out, pickup trucks right next to when you're trying to have your your GT with a couple of appetizers. So, and then you want to invite biking in because you want to have more people. Just a side note, I don't know if anyone's ever been to Europe, to small towns. They have the dedicated parking lanes are between the cars and the sidewalk, and they have their own half-height curb. So from the street, if you can imagine, you have the street parking, a little half-height curb with a short little thing, and then another going up to the regular height of the sidewalk. And then you have your own dedicated lane where there's a half step down and a half step down. So I thought when the town was thinking about going to parallel parking, that was to bring the cars further away from the sidewalks, that they could insert that, on the not driver side where, the door opens up and pow. So those are my 2 thoughts about that.
Thank you, Mick. All right, Isaac, then Russ.
So, a couple of thoughts. I agree with Tim when he says keeping the traffic slow on Main Street is important. I think that is very important. I don't think removing parking is the way to do it. I actually think what Mick was just saying about putting a bike lane in closer to the sidewalk and pushing cars further out could make some sense, because you could still keep angled parking and have a bike lane. Our sidewalks are pretty wide. The thing I'm most concerned about is the demographics of the community, and I keep hammering on this, that I'm concerned about elderly drivers. When we're thinking about who we're accommodating, right? The people who, my experience is the same as yours, Jeff, that, when my kids were bicycling, I did it in neighborhoods, on trails. I wouldn't let my kids bike downtown, right? And so, but I might have them bike part of the way, and then we would walk downtown with the bikes, right? And my concern about bicyclists in the downtown is they are the most able-bodied consumers. They are the ones who are best in a position to walk that last leg, right? So if you're walking, if the decision is, if I'm a consumer and I want to come downtown and I can't, and I'm not taking a bike because, I'm elderly and I'm parking further away from Main Street and I'm going to walk up a hill, right? Who's better able to do that? Someone who is elderly or someone who's on a bike, who's able to bike to that location? And it seems to me that the better course to accommodate bikers would be to create a bicycle lot where there was plenty of room for securing bicycles, whether that be next to the proposed skate park or maybe part of the pocket park that's being proposed, but creating further away from Main Street, creating a lot of parking for bicyclists so that people who wanted to bike to Main Street could bike 90% of the way and then walk the last 10%, rather than making elderly consumers who have difficulty walking that last 10%, who have difficulty with mobility. That it seems like that might be a solution.
Thanks, Isaac. Jeff, did you want to speak to that?
I think I'm not sure that the bike path requires. I mean, the idea of a bike path doesn't necessarily require a reduction of parking spaces. Not sure there's a direct relationship or displacement of those spaces. But it is true that demographically there's handicap spaces, but not every senior citizen has a handicap sticker, is handicapped, needs that spot. And so to be sensitive to who's going to what business and what kinds of spots need to be near to that, I think is just, again, come back to that. We need to really think about what are those paths people might take, and can we make that as short of a path as possible or as conducive as possible to the needs and abilities of the people making those paths. But I think cyclists are also, they can just lean their bike up against a tree and run into a store. I think you want them to get as close to the business as possible, so they can, just like people don't want to drive a car 3 blocks away from where they're going and then walk. They certainly wouldn't want to bike and walk that far. But bike storage is, I think, in short supply downtown. I'm often walking my bike to a stop sign or something because there's just not that many places to put it. So that if that could be more orderly, like you're suggesting, but maybe spread out across Main Street, that would make it easier to bike too. And keep those bikes out of if you can keep the bike on a bike rack, it's less likely to clog up the sidewalk or someone's getting out of their car trying to get to the sidewalk. So you can kind of remove some of those conflicts that way too by organizing it better.
Thanks. Okay, so I am noticing the time, and I'd like Russ and then Susan and Robert to be able to speak. And then Jeff, let's circle back to you at that point. If other people want to speak after that, please put your hands up, but I'm going to make myself a little invisible line here. And we can figure out where we want to go next after those 3 speakers. So Russ, you're up.
Thank you. I'll try to be brief. I live on Chapman Street. I am not a business person downtown, but I walk into the center of town to do a lot of things, research at the library. I do a lot of things for the All Souls Church, and a lot of you have seen me around town. I forgot that this was being put on by the GBA, but I've been thinking about writing a my turn for the paper about this, that we have so many more large passenger vehicles in Greenfield, not just Greenfield, but every city and town. The city streets and parking spaces have not widened and lengthened to accommodate all these large passenger vehicles. Personally, I am scared poopless a lot of the time walking and driving. I will not ride my bicycle in town because it's scary trying to see around vehicles that are parked near corners, particularly large vehicles. You got to get so far into the street to see around vehicles, particularly I use that where Church Street meets Federal Street. And if I want to turn left to head down towards Main Street, that is scary. And honestly, Greenfield can't do anything about it. You're not going to outlaw large vehicles. You're not going to have limits on them. But if there was, I don't know what, it's just something that I've been talking with people about and saying, like, it's just life today. And listening to this conversation has given me some other thoughts about how to communicate to people in town about where parking is, where parking lots are, where there might be spaces here versus not there. And I'll try to write something up and I guess send it to Rachel. But this is just something I never hear anybody saying about, but I see a lot of you folks nodding your heads like, yeah. So thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you, Russ. Susan?
Russ took some of my my concerns. The whole question of angle parking right next to the exit of a street onto Main Street. It's very, very difficult to make a left-hand turn, whether you're in a bicycle or in a car. And so I think the question there of I'm wondering if all of our parking has to be the same. If it's either, yes, it's angle parking, or no, it's not, or, that there may be a way to do a mix here. The other thing is, as part of the demographic that Isaac is concerned about, it's good for me to walk. And I think it's important to not assume that certainly there are some of us that need assistance, and for those we can have spaces that are designated. But I think that the issue of being a walkable city and being a city where people actually move from place to place without getting into their cars is an important part of this discussion. I will not stop going to any of your stores because I have to walk an extra block to get there. That is, I'm strange because I lived in Boston for a long time before I came here. But the idea that everything is determined by where I can park the car is not accurate in terms of whether I go to the theater, whether I go to a specific restaurant, and whether I go to Baker's. That is not the determinant. And while yes, sometimes it would be nice to be able to just jump out, get something, and run back in, it's not going to make the big difference. So thanks.
Thank you. All right, Bob Williford.
Yeah, I'm a member of the Greenfield Commission on Disability Access, and I wanted to remind everybody that there are some like civil rights rules that apply to handicap parking. And if you think about what a parallel parking handicapped accessible slot looks like, you are probably hallucinating, because there is really not such a thing. There are things that you can do to make that work, but you can't have anything on the adjacent sidewalk, no signposts, no lights, no benches, because ramps come out that side of the van. And if you are disembarking on the driver's side, as people who I know drive cars with hand controls, you're toast in the traffic. So there are some laws that discourage that. And the diagonal parking is the way that you will find it safest for people who are trying to unload wheelchairs and get themselves out of their vehicles. That's it.
Thank you, Bob. Jeff, we're back at you now, okay?
Great points. I think we don't need all parking spaces to be the same, as long as none of them are weird, as long as people can figure them out. We already, angled spots, parallel spots, those are both precedented in Greenfield and the rest of the world. So, you know, it's conceivable that some block has some parallel spots and another block has angled spots, and the angled spots are there because it's easier to make it handicap accessible. I think you can have that variety, and the handicap spaces is, you know, it's a challenging. It's sort of like in a neighborhood where there's a slow down children are playing sign, but there hadn't been a child there for 45 years. You know, this is the sort of thing you need to update routinely as demographics change, as stores turn over, continually go back and make sure that the landscape of parking, the inventory makes sense for today, for what people need today. The comments about the big cars, and as a cyclist, I definitely have noticed that. Someone in a Hummer drove by me one time in Atlanta and, like, I don't know if he spanked me or I didn't crash, but it was definitely intimidating and kind of scary. But actually there's science to say that narrower streets, when people feel more constrained, they go slower. I mean, if you've been on 91, they're doing the work on the bridge. If they start to take in the road with the Jersey barriers, everybody slows down. You don't need a new speed limit. People are just going to go slower because it feels riskier. And roundabouts, for example, or rotaries, while they're not good for pedestrians or cyclists, they're safer for motorists because everybody's a little bit confused, and so they just drive a little slower. And I think that's kind of borne out in Main Street. You know, statistically, angled spaces are more dangerous than parallel spaces. Just objectively, that's just a fact in the world. But in Greenfield, when it's bustling and busy and everybody's used to it, it works, and there aren't a ton of crashes. So, you know, there's nuance to all these things, and we can find the solution that works for this community. And I also just think the walkability as a personal health goal. I walk as much as I can too. I think people, more walkable communities tend to have healthier or better health outcomes for their population. So as long as the people who want to drive can still make that work within reason, but the people who want to walk feel invited to do that, you have a better community. And from an economic development standpoint, communities that are more walkable tend to be more prosperous. It translates to property value. When you look at and you go on Zillow, walk score is one of the metrics that really does drive prices commercially and residentially. So walk score, if people aren't familiar with it, is it's just a calculation of how walkable your life would be if you were there. Can you get to the things you need to get to? And honestly, for a place with the population of Greenfield, we have a ton of stuff downtown. You can live your life downtown and get pretty much everything you need. I think that's wonderful. So we're set up to be walkable, and we have an opportunity to make it even more walkable in how we treat our main streets and in our public realm.
All right, thanks. I feel like I'm just gonna put this over to Mick unless anybody else has something they want to say before we leave. If you can do it in an orderly fashion, feel free to unmute yourself and speak up. Okay, not so.
I want to say one more thing. I made a note. The idea that, Susan, also, I'm happy. I would rather walk a block or 2 blocks to get to a store downtown. When that happens to me, I celebrate because I'm like, great, everybody's downtown. I can't find a parking space. This is a good day. Not everyone might feel that way, but I think it's a by some measure, a barometer of just economic success. Everybody's trying to be here all at the same time. So it's a good thing as long as it doesn't break down the system.
That is a sweet and sour thing, because when you're trying to find parking, it's hard to feel glad that there's no parking.
Do you see that Nancy wanted to say something?
I just have one last thing. I want to thank you. I've been listening. A fabulous discussion. I love all these different points of view put on the table, and I just want to say also how valuable the sort of on-street restaurant eating experience has been, and I'm just not quite sure how that's going to get accommodated with the bike path and all that other stuff. I'm sure you guys have figured it out, but I wish our street was wider so that we could make our sidewalks wider, so that we could really live on our sidewalks more and could accommodate the parking that everybody needs and the bike path. Wouldn't that be great? Well, just dreaming. So thank you.
Let's bring
Feel
it.
free to dream. Yep. And then Bob.
Just a couple comments. E-bikes are here, but they're going to be way more popular in the future. Prices are coming down. You can now get an e-bike for less than $2,000, and I really think that more people may be biking in the future. They won't have to pedal as much. They can use their e-bike. Secondly, MJ, you could probably look in the records, but way back, Greenfield did a planning study to turn Main Street into one way, where it was one way going one way, and then the street used to be the hangar, whatever street that is, or one of those streets back there was the one that went the other way. But they never made the change back in the 20s or 30s, and I don't know how that would play. Bill's laughing.
He's not laughing at you. He's laughing with you. Come on. All right, Bill.
Okay.
Did
All right.
you
Anyway,
say?
but
Oh, I'm sorry.
Bill wants to say something.
I just want to quickly say, I'm not a curmudgeon about, having a bike path and so forth. I like the idea. If we can do both and not reduce parking, I'm all for it. I'm all for making improvements and make it more accessible. But parking is really a key component that I believe trumps, in my opinion, trumps most everything else.
Right. Well, it would be nice if it was all, or most of it was behind all the buildings, that the Main Street would look prettier and be more accommodating to, open spaces or whatever. Maybe we could, all right, anyway. So thanks, everybody. Anybody else have anything they want to say before we shut this puppy down?
Can I say one last thing to Bob's point about the e-bikes? That's something that we see all over the place in other communities. The Segway, if anyone remembers that, was supposed to be the e-bike, and it was supposed to be the liberating thing that got you where you needed to be without breaking a sweat. But it is true that there's a whole class of people that don't want to bike because they don't want to bring their gym shorts and they don't want to take a shower when they get to where they're going. And if they could just do it electrically and get to where they're going, they would choose that. It's easy to store. The personal mobility, as we call it, micro mobility, is definitely changing the game for many people. And in a compact community like Greenfield, I could imagine a lot of people, more and more people, I see them around too. On the car side, with electric vehicles, we need to be thinking about how to integrate charging stations for them. But cars are going to be able to do more and more things for themselves that will obviate some of the challenges we're talking about today. They'll be able to park themselves in a parallel spot. And so no one will have to learn how to parallel park again. It'll be only us old people will know how to do it if your system couldn't do it itself. They could even, self-driving cars, people thought those might be here by now. It might be a little bit longer, but once cars can drive themselves, it'll be your personal chauffeur to take you right to where you want to go. We won't have very many on-street parking spaces because there'll just be a bunch of drop-off spaces, and then cars will drive themselves to some remote lot. I mean, there's a lot of possible futures out there. And so what we're advising our clients to do is typically, do what works for now and what you can foresee, but don't hardwire in inabilities to adapt to other potential futures in the future. So don't move the curbs into some spot where you're never going to be able to do something smart next. Anticipate and be prepared to adapt and change over time without, while still accommodating the needs of today.
Okay, and I saw Isaac also has his hand up again.
No, I was just going to make a shout out to anyone who's still on, who's a business, who's not a member of the GBA, that to please consider joining the GBA so we can start bringing the business community, local business community together to have conversations like this and at least get our concerns on the table. So those people who are making decisions have at least hear what we have to say and understand how it impacts us. And I appreciate the GBA for putting this forum together.
Thank you, Isaac. And Mick, I'm going to ask you in the script that you have a couple of other opportunities for people to be able to get involved in parking in the future in Greenfield.
Got on the screen right there. It's just waiting for my moment.
Ooh, okay.
Yeah, absolutely. I'd like to echo what Isaac just said. Isaac is a member of the GBA, the theater, Garden Theaters, and the more local businesses in Greenfield that are members of the GBA that participate and sort of chime in now and then, we can have more of these kind of forums, because we all have the same issues more or less, regardless of whether you're the local ice cream or the driving far away to get your wedding dress made. It's all, we're all here in Greenfield. So regarding opportunities for future input on the parking situation, here are some things that you might want to write down if you want to be involved. Greenfield Parking and Traffic Commission meets monthly on the second Thursday at 4:30. Sustainable Greenfield Implementation Committee meets on the 4th Thursdays. A meeting to be advertised later in the spring and during the summer for deliberate downtown revitalization. You can join, you can go to the greenfieldbusiness.org website for the GBA and go to the contact form, fill it out. We send out a lot of notices for all this kind of stuff that's going on. So even if you don't want to join, but you want to know what's going on, go fill that out. If you're a resident, you want to kind of know what's going on in the business community, you can fill out that form and get our monthly, sometimes twice monthly newsletter that goes out. Roadway improvements, Mass DOT holds public hearings on projects. Watch for them later this year and next year. But again, GBA greenfieldbusiness.org, that's your best place to go to sort of get plugged in and hear more about this. So thank you all for attending. Thank you, Jeff, for moderating and having a lot of good information, a lot of good thoughts and not opinions, but different views on what could be and what is and all that. And I'd like to remind you the GBA is having another forum Wednesday, March 23rd, where we're going to meet Natalie Blaze. We had Susanna Whips last month because she's taking over North Greenfield, and Natalie is going to take Southern Greenfield. We're losing Paul Mark. Like him, going to miss the beard. But we'll all be able to meet Natalie, and that'll be a good thing. So that's another thing the GBA is doing. So thanks everybody for showing up, and go Greenfield.